Tonight on the Matt Gaetz Show, we're on location in San Salvador, El Salvador, and I've got an exclusive interview coming up with the vice president of this country regarding how Salvadorians are thinking about being at the center of the news cycle in the United States, their war against MS-13, and the future partnership of these two nations working together. Plus, I've got an exclusive interview with the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, regarding all of the new files that have been released on the RFK assassination, the leakers that are now going to be potentially prosecuted following the reveal of classified information, and a new pope has been chosen. We'll get DC Drano's take on that and so much more. It's all next on the Matt Gaetz Show. Let's do this. We're shaking up Washington, D.C. We're breaking the fever.
You ever watch this guy on television? It's like a machine. He's great. Matt Gaetz.
It's no surprise to anyone who watches this program that years ago I became a big fan of Salvadorian President Nayib Bukele. El Salvador for so long had been just the butt of jokes, or a place where sorrow emerged out of death and warfare and gangs and destruction. MS-13 got their hold in El Salvador after growing in prisons in Southern California. After those prisoners were deported, they found a very permissive environment in this small Central American country. And so they became almost as powerful as the government. Neighborhoods, streets, businesses, transport, all run by the gangs. Gangs and violence certainly have impacted other countries in Central America, and many of those are still dealing with the challenges. But what you see in El Salvador is victory. Somehow, President Bukele was able to marshal the spirit of this nation to fight back. And now the prosperity is evident. Not only has El Salvador been deemed the principal and leading security partner for the United States when it comes to the deportation of criminal gangs, they've also invited more tourists as the State Department has lowered the travel advisory. They've embraced Bitcoin as a form of legal tender in the nation, and the future is as bright as ever. We now will review the history of this country, the present challenges and operations that are ongoing with the United States, and a future that seems bright in the land of the everlasting wave and the eternal smile. El Salvador is indeed at the center of all discussions in the world regarding so much important news, and we are joined now by the Vice President of El Salvador, Felix Ulloa. Mr. Vice President, it's so good to see you again. With El Salvador being at the center of so much international discussion, I wanted my viewers to get a better sense of the rich history of the country, of the culture here, and maybe if we could just start with you telling me a little bit about what El Salvador was like when you grew up and how it's different today.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to talk to you. And of course, speaking of my own country, it is not an honor, but also a pleasure. Well, as you know, El Salvador is the little and smaller country in the Americas. But in spite of the small territory, we have had important roles in the historical process. We led the process in the independence from Spain in the 18th century, and then we became one of the first republic to exporting coffee in the 19th century. In the 20th century, we also led some different, let's say, special issues that led the country to move forward and presenting as a new state, leading aside and behind all the feudal way of our historical process. We became a republic, modern republic in the 1950 with a new constitution, but then we suffered a civil war in the 80s. More recently, and after the peace agreement in 1992, we believed that we were ready to start a new country, to build a second republic after the independence from Spain, but instead we got another social war that was led by the Maras, with the gangs, that was the result of the absence of the state in the communities, in the society. Many of the dysfunctional families coming from the Civil War, they had kids and children that were abandoned. They became part of this member. They start like, small, people like doing some sort of robberies and stuff like that in the street. But then when the gang members from the United States were sent back to El Salvador, they became a more structured organization, and they became a power who started growing up to a point that they challenged the state. They control the community, they control the life, the daily life of the person in the community, and that was the worst part of the recent history in our country, when we suffered this pandemic of the gangs over 30 years. It was until the President Bukele decided to declare the wars against the gangs that we started living in this new country. The renaissance of El Salvador started when we declared the war against the gangs in March 2022, and most of them were imprisoned. We have in jail more than 85,000 members of the gangs, and the harmony and the peace went back to the communities. Now, the normal life start in the communities. People start smiling, the children start playing on the streets, things that you can figure out 5 years ago when the gangs controlled the neighborhood. And we start giving back many houses. 3,500 houses have been given back to the owners in one neighborhood called La Campanera. Those houses were taken by the gangs, saying to the owners, you have 24 hours to leave the house because I want the house. So that was the way that we live in the recent past. Now this is a new country, and because that, you can find now new people smiling, enjoying their lives, going to the public places, to the parks, to the squares, or whatever, the beaches. We have, by the way, the most beautiful beaches in the region. And that is one of the, put it in a nutshell, all our history in El Salvador.
It is hard for Americans to think about gangs being that involved in every aspect of life. Even in places where gangs are strong in the United States, maybe they extort a few businesses, sell some drugs, make people a little bit afraid. But what you seem to be describing is a circumstance where the gangs controlled where you lived, where you could eat, where you could have recreation with your family. What did that do to the land of the everlasting smile?
It's hard to understand that there is only one explanation. Mm-hmm. It was the collusion of the governments in the past with the guerrilla. With the gangs. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, explain that to me, please.
Yes, of course. There were two-party systems in El Salvador in the past after the peace agreement. One from the right wing, which is called Arena, and one from the left wing, which was called FMLN. Arena governed this country for 20 years. FMLN governed this country for 10 years, from 1922 to 2019, when President Bukele took office. So during those years, you could see how the leaders of the party were dealing with the gangs in order to receive.
Well, that sounds like the gangs were in charge of the country, and then the leaders of the government worked for the gangs on both the right side and the left side.
Either ways. I mean, because the gangs have,
Well, how did you defeat them? I think there are other countries in Central America who struggle with the violence and the gangs. We see things getting worse in Costa Rica. We see President Moreno trying to fight them in Panama. We see the problems in Guatemala and Honduras. And El Salvador seems to be this shining example of victory for the people and for peace and prosperity. How have you been able to do here what your neighbors have not been able to do?
Well, it was, we had the chance to have a leader who took the leadership in society and challenged and defeating those criminal structures. It was not that easy. It took some time because, as I said, it was a collusion between the gangs and the two-party system that they govern in El Salvador, and they control the Congress. In the first 2 years that we were in office, from 2019 to 2021, we cannot do anything against the gang because they control the Congress. When we won elections at the parliamentary level in 2021, it was the turning point. It was at the moment when the Congress aligned with the executive branch, and then we start fighting against the gangs with all the power of the state, the institutions, in rule of law, respecting all the rule of law, basic on the democratic principles, but taking care that we are defending the human rights of the population at large. Because that was the problem. You know, just to give you one figure, from 2009 to 2019, in the two previous government to our government, we received the statistic from the Legal Institute, Medicine Institute. The chief was 41,000 killed Salvadorians in 1 decade, in 10 years. So
that was 41,000 people dead because of the gangs.
Because of the gang, killed. We don't talk about disappears, rapists, extortion, all those crimes. Just killed that were reported by this legal institute. So that was the country that we received. So the first challenge from President Bukele was to defeat the gangs. And
how did he inspire the people to defeat an institution so strong?
Well, the first step was to put in place the contour territorial plan, a 7-step plan that was in the first phase.
Did the judges try to get in the way of your victories against the
absolutely.
gangs?
This is something that is very hard to understand how we can succeed in this project, because you have to be involved with the judicial branch, with the legislative branch, and the executive branch. For instance, the executive branch, we had the police and the army to fight, but we have to have also the legal framework who allows you to capture these people and prosecute them. But you have to have also the judges which have the courage to do that, because in the past they were threatened by the gangs. I received a woman judge who came, crying to my office, showing me a picture that the chief of the gang sent it to her, showing the two girls, two daughters of her in the school. He sent it to the judge like a threat, in saying, if you judge me or you condemn me, I know who your daughters are in the school. So that judge...
Did you share that threat with your family?
I know, well, absolutely. We are, everybody in El Salvador were under this threat. No one sector was free of them. The issue is that...
Did you believe them, that they would kill
absolutely,
your family?
Yes. When she showed me that, I believe that, because it was a common history that we heard elsewhere. There was the same issue, the threat of the gangs, the collusion of even the police was infiltrated by the gangs. So the problem was, how can you deal with that at that moment if you don't have the proper response from the government? Because the government was in collusion. That's what I'm saying. They have, a pact with the gangs. That it was well known, because even the OAS came to El Salvador, to bless the agreement between the gangs and the government. So there were no way for the people. The people has to suffer that, and no one in the international community raised the voice to condemn that. On the contrary, we receive, the blessing of the OAS for the pact between the government and the gangs. So the President Bukele said, no way. This is...
Wait, you believe that the international community, in some iterations, actually wanted the government working with the gangs instead of against the gangs?
Well, that was something, that was an approach.
That sounds crazy.
Absolutely insane. But people were desperate. Even some of the high-level members of the Catholic hierarchy, they approved the agreement between the government and the gangs. So, as I said...
Do you think that there were forces in the United States that wanted the government to work with the gangs instead of against them?
At that moment, I am not sure.
Me either, which concerns me.
Absolutely not.
It seems like what you did was so obvious and so smart.
In the state, the people were not aware about what was the situation, the real situation.
Well, I think they're aware now.